Liz, how did you discover that Matthew was suffering from epilepsy?
At the beginning I didn't know it was epilepsy, I just knew there was something wrong. He would fall over for no reason and he would shake in his sleep, I remember now. And I used to take him to the doctors regularly asking what was wrong with him, and they kept telling me there was nothing wrong with him. He had been tested when he was 4 days old and we knew that he had sleep apnea. But I knew that I didn't know what other problems there was. And one day, eventually, I took him to my local doctor when he was quite listless in my arms and asked the doctor what he wanted to call it that day. And he could see there was a problem and sent us to Blacktown Hospital straight away, straight from the surgery to the hospital. And in the beginning, they did a CAT scan and then they did an EEG, and they told me that I'd get the results in 3 weeks. They rang me that night, I remember it was a Tuesday night, and said to me they had the results of Matthew's EEG and it was grossly abnormal. They started treating him with Epilepsy. Back at that time, I don't really know that we saw seizures. They might have just been in his sleep. But I didn't know what I was looking for in a seizure anyway. But as he seemed to be, the more medication we gave him, the worse Matthew got. The seizures started to become obvious. I can remember when he was in primary school, me showing a family member who doubted whether he had epilepsy, what a seizure was, and by putting Matthew under any stress at all, you could cause a seizure. And I set him at the kitchen bench and was questioning him about his maths, which was enough to make him have a seizure. And we, for years, just kept trying different drugs. Does that answer the question?
When was he diagnosed?
He would have been about 3.
How many seizures did Matthew have in a day?
I don't know, because I didn't really know what I was looking at. It wasn't like in the end when a seizure was very obvious. They seemed, from when they started until when we went on the ketogenic diet, it was just constantly, gradually getting worse and more.
What effect did it have on the family life?
Well, Matthew's the third of 4 children, and I think, and to this day, my youngest didn't get probably the attention that the others had. The others had all learned every musical instrument and played every sport and everything like that. Well, because Matthew couldn't do these things, Joshua didn't get to do a lot of them either. And probably my attention was more focused on Matthew because it was a horrible time living in fear that something terrible was going to happen to him. He was with me most of the time. As he got older and the seizures got worse, he used to stand there actually holding onto my arm. And so I think the rest of the family just sort of had to find their way, because at that time the most important thing was Matthew and how he was.
What effect did the epilepsy have on Matthew's life?
Well, I think the effect on Matthew's life was huge, because Matthew could never go and play in the playground with the other children. I believe the drug Epilepsy made him reclusive and eventually started becoming obese. I would take him to sports carnivals and he would not participate at all. He didn't want anything to do with the children in his class. At the later time, not long before he went on the ketogenic diet, Matthew used to sit in the classroom on the days that he could go to school. He would sit in the classroom at lunchtime with his teacher because he really couldn't, the glare, anything would trigger a seizure, and we were in the end having a lot of seizures, or he was having a lot of seizures. He couldn't play sports. We tried different things like swimming lessons, and I would walk up and down beside the pool in case I had to jump in. Everything was very hard.
When did you find out about the ketogenic diet?
When he was quite young, the doctor said to me, and said virtually nothing about it. The way she said it, I thought it was just not an option. She said, there is a diet you can go on, but every time he eats something he can't, you'll be back in hospital. And at that point, Matthew wasn't really bad. He was just having little seizures where his sort of head would shake and he would sort of look back over the corner. His eyes would sort of roll back a little bit.
What made you decide to go on the ketogenic diet?
Matthew had a seizure that lasted 4 hours, which put him in the Children's Hospital for a month, a couple of days short of a month. And during the time we were in there, we met Hans and his family, Hans, Alexandra, and their son Nicky. And Nicky was being put on the ketogenic diet. I thought it was pretty horrific when I first saw it because I saw Nicky distressed. And at that point it wasn't an option for us, I didn't think. But as I took Matthew off all medication a year before he had that seizure, and he actually played soccer for the first time in a team. His seizures didn't get any better or any worse, so to me there was no gain to him being on all these different medications that he was on that were affecting his life with, as I said, being a reclusive and things like this. And after a year he had the 4-hour seizure. They made him anaphylactic to Dilantin, which is phenytoin, and to stop the seizure, and told me that if I ever took him off medication again, I would be in a lot of trouble. And then the medication started again, and the trial, and adding this drug and adding that drug, and all I could see, Matthew was getting worse and worse, and bigger, and withdrawing from society more and more. And then we were actually at camp at Jenolan Caves, and I had to go on all of his school activities with him, and we'd be climbing the ladders and me behind Matthew in case he had a seizure, because by this point the seizures, I say 50 a day, I don't know if that's an exaggeration, I'm not trying to exaggerate, but it was constant. Matthew had to have someone beside him all of the time virtually. We were on the camp and I was terrified Matthew was going to fall down these ladders and take all the kids with him, and I had to sleep on the floor across the doorway because there were stairs outside the door where he was staying. I was scared if he went out the door he would have a seizure. And on the way home from the camp I was very upset, and I rang his neurologist and said, these drugs aren't working, he's getting worse. And she said to me, ketogenic diet, and without a split second's thought I just said yes. And she told me it would take about a month for her to organise it and get someone who was able to, a dietitian that could administer the ketogenic diet. And during that month we spent a lot of time talking to Matthew about it. We believed it was the answer to our prayers, that Matthew has been given this opportunity, because by that stage we'd learned that very few children in Australia do get the opportunity to go on the ketogenic diet. And by the time came for us to go to hospital, Matthew was completely prepared for it. On the day we were going to hospital, the dietitian didn't turn up, and somebody said to me, just go. Once you're there, they won't send you back, because we were desperate this was going to happen. So we went to the hospital. I think we waited 3 days for them to get a dietitian in while we were in hospital. And on the day that we went to hospital, we went to Coles on the way to get some notepads, because I knew nothing about diets or carbohydrates or anything like that at that point. And so I was getting some writing material so I could take notes. And I do remember in one aisle in Coles, Matthew had 4 seizures. That's how bad it was getting. So that's how we came to go on the ketogenic diet.
What did the neurologist think about the ketogenic diet? Was she reluctant, or?
I think she saw it as a last resort. She knew that I wasn't just going to sit back and let things go the way they were. I was getting more and more upset and more vocal about it. And so I think she probably thought there was no option but to give it a try, and to me, to our family, it was a godsend.
What happened when Matthew went on the ketogenic diet?
It was unbelievable. From the day we started the diet, as soon as they put Matthew into starvation, Matthew never had another seizure. He never had one more seizure. He had what they thought might have been a febrile convulsion 3 weeks later, where he was taken to hospital, and they ruled out that it wasn't a seizure. And since the day we started the diet, I remember at the hospital saying to the nurses, no one's going to believe me that he's epileptic because he's not having seizures. I mean, we went from constant seizures to no seizures. And to this day, which is 11 years later, I think it's 11 years in June, later, Matthew still hasn't had a seizure.
Who decided what Matthew was going to eat?
Well, we learnt about, I saw the food that was being given to him in hospital, which was virtually, Matthew being vegetarian makes it a lot more difficult because of the protein and fat. But he was being given a couple of pieces of cheese, a little bit of salad, and I can't even remember what else, maybe a piece of buttered bread with a lot of butter on it. It wasn't a meal that you could have sustained for any length of time. And they also gave us pages, which I still have in a folder here, which showed you that, say, 15 grams of fat was equal to half a cup of, say, avocado or whatever. And it was impossible. There's no way we could have done it. When we got home from the hospital, I can still remember we sat there for 4 hours trying to work out how we were going to feed Matthew in this strict formula that we'd been given of how much protein, carbohydrate and fat. And I then rang Hans van der Wegen because I knew that he had recently put his son on the diet, and asked him how they were doing it. And Hans came straight over to our house that night and installed the Keto-Soft program, which I don't think it was called that at the time because it was very early days for him as well. And we made a meal that night, and Matthew was on the diet for 2.5 years, and never once did we make a meal without that computer.
Did Matthew have any choice himself?
Yes. Do you want me to show you the folder? I've got it out if you want to see the folder.
Yeah, later, mate.
Okay. What we did, oh, that's right. What we did was we put all the ingredients into the computer, as you do, and we made the meals. And every time we got a meal that Matthew liked, we printed it out, so we had a whole book. And then each day Matthew would say, and we called them names like Lone Ranger's spaghetti and all funny names because he was a 10-year-old boy. And he would say, Mum, I want the Lone Ranger spaghetti tonight, or I want the fruit salad, or whatever he wanted. And so I could shop accordingly to it. And in the end, Matthew had a choice of hundreds of meals that he could have. And if we ever thought of something else, we just put the ingredients into the computer, and it was a daily occurrence using this program on the computer. And Matthew was having much better meals. He was having fantastic type of meals. He was never hungry. And in fact, when we went off the diet, it took us 6 months. Once I decided to stop the diet, and it took us 6 months to go off it. The day that I believed that we were probably as close to a normal diet and he was ready to eat normal food, we ordered a pizza for him because he was pizza crazy before he went on the diet, and he'd had none since he'd been on it. And when the pizza arrived, he wouldn't eat it because he was scared. He obviously felt so good, and he was frightened of going back to what had happened. So the food he had on the diet was satisfying to him.
How has he been after the ketogenic diet?
He eats and drinks everything he wants, even alcohol, anything that he wants to eat or drink. There's no restriction whatsoever with anything that he eats. He now has a light car licence, which he would never have had a licence before. He drives a 4-wheel drive. He goes 4-wheel driving. He virtually runs his father's business. Just a life that Matthew would never, ever have had. Matthew's life was, Matthew couldn't even have a shower without us. I would get in the shower with him while he showered, holding him, and then his little brother would be outside the shower and hold him while he got dried. He would go to school quite often half days because the seizures seemed worse in the morning than in the afternoon. And if he was not too bad in the morning, I would take him to school about midday. But we had a maths program, which we did at home, which kept him up with his schoolwork. But his life was just getting worse and worse and worse. I couldn't say to Matthew, go to the front door and call Josh. He'd be out the front playing with his friends. Josh didn't have the didn't have the confidence to even do that by the end. He was just withdrawing from everything.
Do you have anything you would like to add?
Well, the ketogenic diet and the Keto-Cloud program has given Matthew a life. They told us he wouldn't grow on it. He's probably 6'1" now. The diet, the whole thing was so easy. People said to me, wasn't it hard? Matthew was amazing. He never cheated. He wouldn't let anyone else make his meals because he feared that someone might make a mistake, and he knew that I was diligent and would not do it anything but exact. And he got his life back. He's got friends. In fact, today he's come here from being at lunch with his friends at Ryde. He's driven from Hornsby to Ryde and then here to meet with us today. He goes away with his friends. He has a fantastic life. And without the program, we could not have lived for 2.5. He couldn't have done 2.5 years living on lettuce and blocks of cheese. And I do not believe for 1 second that he would be seizure-free like he is today. He did, a year after we came off the diet, we went into hospital for days, and they kept him on the video telemetry. I think it might have even been 48 hours. And the young nurse who had been doing Matthew's EEGs from when he was a little boy came into me after she'd taken him off the equipment and went and looked at the videotapes, and she came back to me and she said, I can't believe it. She said, I'd studied the ketogenic diet. I didn't think it was possible. She said, but I've seen it. She said, there's no form of any seizures on his diet. And Dr. Anthony, in the appointment we had with her afterwards, sorry, I shouldn't have said her name. The doctor that we saw after, his doctor when we saw her after, said that there was a little bit of activity in his brain. She said, but probably no more than what they would find in any normal child's brain. It's just they don't do EEGs on normal children. So she believed that he was cured. And to us, it was a miracle.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Liz. And we'll go over.
I hope I didn't go on too much. I'm trying to get
Matthew, what can you remember from the time you had epilepsy?
I remember my mother and other family members assisting me through being able to stand up, having epileptic fits. At school I was unable to play. I wasn't very sociable. I didn't really have friends at the time, and was just unable to interact with others as I was just falling over and not living a proper life.
What about sports?
I wasn't able to participate in sports due to just about anything causing me to have a seizure, heat, glare, running around, just anything would just set me off.
What did you do during that time?
I used to go back to the classroom and just sit and read or play with toys, watch a movie, especially during lunchtimes as well. I would mostly be watched by the teacher in the classroom.
Can you remember when you went on the ketogenic diet?
Sure. With the ketogenic diet, I was beginning to socialise. I was being able to move by myself. I was sort of getting used to it in the beginning. It was a very different lifestyle from actually having the seizures and being watched over constantly. It was kind of relieving.
Life at school must have changed too for you then.
Yes, it did. I was able to participate in class properly, as opposed to just sitting it out. For sports, I was playing sports at the time. I got into it. Yeah.
What changed when you were on the ketogenic diet?
What changed?
Home life.
Home life, I was able to play computer games. I was able to, I didn't have to be watched all the time. I wasn't supervised. It got to the point where I was more independent than I was prior to being on the diet. So going to the bathroom by myself, etc. And yeah, showers.
I believe you broke your arm playing sports.
Yes, I was playing football and went to tackle a kid much smaller than me, and my arm went into his knee and broke my wrist. So yeah, it was, but didn't set me back too far.
And you became big in handball and basketball.
Was it hard to be on the ketogenic diet?
It was to begin with. One of the hardest things was the MCT oil. It made me very sick. I had stomach cramps. I spent most of the time in the bathroom every day. It gave me very bad diarrhoea, but eventually, a few months getting used to it, it was easier on me and not so noticeable. Being on the diet obviously changed a lot of things for me, so that was just a small price to pay.
How was it when you went off the diet?
Before I went off the diet, the first time I was aiming to go off the diet was when I had a pizza being ordered, and I didn't actually want to go off at that point. I stayed on it for a bit longer, a few more months, just so that I was absolutely sure of it. When I finally went off, I did have to decide that eventually I'd have to stop the diet. So it was a bit worrying at the time, but it was much better because I was actually allowed to eat things that I wasn't prior to. So did gain a lot of weight.
You rather stayed on the diet than have pizza at one point?
Exactly, and that's. I was too worried to come off at the time, just because I'd spent over 2 years on the diet, and I didn't want to have to do it again.
Do you still have seizures?
No, I didn't have one seizure after the diet. Still 10 to 11 years since I've been off the diet, I haven't had a seizure. I haven't had any weird occurrence happening. It's just been normal life.
What are you doing now?
I am working for my dad in a warehouse. I pretty much manage the business, and I'm doing activities with my friends, going forward, driving. I go play sports regularly, go out to the city drinking with my mates. I live a normal life now.
Do you have anything you would like to add?
The ketogenic diet was amazing for me because prior to being on the diet, I was limited to what I could do. I was very supervised, not independent at all. If I hadn't been on the diet and still had epilepsy today, I probably wouldn't be able to go out or forward drive or drive a car, have a licence. It would limit me a lot to where I could go in life. So the diet and the software that Hans made was fantastic. It really is a big help. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that.